Good day. The last couple of days have witnessed a significant drop in gas prices, natural gas prices in Europe, for which I suspect that there are two factors at play. One is the fact that Asian buying of natural gas appears to have declined as the Asians have successfully filled their gas reserves for the winter, and this has released more liquefied natural gas to go to Europe. And we've been hearing stories about how 10 liquefied natural gas tankers are steaming to Europe from the United States. The other factor, which I suspect is equally important, is that a lot of people who were speculating as gas prices rose have now cashed in their profits, and that has caused prices of gas in Europe to fall. These oscillations in prices are very common at a time when prices are booming, because obviously rises in prices attract speculators and they obviously want to take out their profits at some point. And as I said, it's normal during a price surge for prices to rise and fall as these profits are taken out of the picture. Having said that, I suspect that the gravity continues to push prices upwards. I doubt that there is going to be enough liquefied natural gas from the United States to fill in the gaps, and what I'm hearing is that in Europe overall, the situation with natural gas reserves underground in the various underground storage systems remains extremely poor, with a very tight situation probably looming after the end of the holidays. Can I say that also there's a report from TASS, which is based upon information provided by Gazprom, which says that the situation with Ukraine's gas storage is critical. It reads, Ukraine since December 24 is in the zone of historically low gas reserves in its underground storage system, 14.37 billion cubic meters, 9.9 billion cubic meters lower than last year's figures, and already 1 billion cubic meters smaller than at the injection start in April of this year. So it's only at 2/3 of the level that it was this time last year, Ukraine's gas storage, and it's actually lower than it was in April when Ukraine started, in theory, to fill its reserves in preparation for the winter. China is currently going through an extremely severe cold snap. If, as some people believe, the situation in Europe turns cold in the new year, then we could be looking at real problems, as I've discussed in previous videos. And of course, in Ukraine, the situation could easily, very quickly, turn critical. Anyway, it's perhaps interesting in this context of a difficult energy picture in Europe, to see what outsiders say. I've been reading what Americans and Europeans say, what the Germans say, and by the way, the German Economics Ministry has again denied that there's been any interruptions of gas supply from Russia. I've also obviously been looking at what the Russians say. But one of the major gas importers today is not Europe, it is China, and the Chinese have given their own perspective of what is causing the problems in Europe at this particular time with energy shortage. And the Chinese don't blame green policies. They don't blame the decision by the Europeans to move from long-term contracts for their gas supply with Gazprom to short-term contracts, something, by the way, which the European Commission is doubling down upon. They now want all European natural gas to be provided on a short-term contract basis by 2040. This despite all the problems which we are seeing now. Those are not the problems according to the Chinese, nor is it anti-Russian policies on the part of European governments. It is rather the fact that the Europeans are subordinating their economic and foreign policies, and by extension their energy policies, to the United States, to what the US wants them to do. And there's been an interesting commentary about this on Global Times, as I said, the unofficial voice of the Chinese Communist Party and of the Chinese government, and I'm going to read it out. It says this: Europe needs an energy policy independent of US interference. And the article goes on to say the following: it is a bleak winter for Europe, mired in a seemingly endless energy crisis, with gas prices in Europe surging sixfold now. Last week, the European benchmark, the Dutch gas price on the ICE futures exchange, hit a record high. Whilst Western politicians have frequently accused Russia of withholding gas supplies to Europe over delays in the certification of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, Russia has always denied such allegations. Superficially speaking, a point of friction between Russia and Europe has focused on the Nord Stream 2 that was designed to ship Russian gas to Germany, but the project is facing regulatory hurdles after the new German government decides to suspend its certification. While it may be tempting for some European politicians to blame Russia for not supplying enough gas, figuring out who ends up profiting from the energy crunch of late across Europe may give us some clues as to who is pulling the strings behind the scenes. For Europe, the continuous surge in gas prices this year has hit downstream industries hard, threatening to derail the bloc's economic recovery. For Russia, the non-operational Nord Stream 2 project, which cost Moscow hundreds of billions to build, has to a certain extent weakened Russia's ability and incentives to supply gas to Europe. It seems that only US LNG suppliers are now happy about the situation. At least 10 American LNG vessels are heading to Europe, and LNG prices in Europe are 13 times higher than in the US, Bloomberg reported. The US Energy Information Administration projected US LNG exports would reach 11.5 billion cubic feet per day in 2022, becoming the world's biggest LNG exporter and surpassing Qatar and Australia, Reuters reported. It is no secret that to the world that the US government has been obstructing the construction of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline for many years by imposing all types of political and economic sanctions on related parties. The stake is high behind the US's suppression of the project because the pipeline could enable more cheap gas supplies from Russia to Europe, depriving US suppliers of a prime export market. Whether the Nord Stream 2 will promote energy cooperation between Russia and Europe or become a trigger of tensions across the Atlantic will remain to be seen. While the US doesn't really care about Europe's energy security, Washington won't tolerate anything that threatens its energy trade. What the US government wants is to preserve its global hegemony in the energy sector. The US energy hegemony is one of the important pillars of American global hegemony. So the US will do everything in its position to ensure global energy supply patterns are in line with its global geopolitical power play. if the energy cooperation between Russia and Europe were allowed to unfold without any complications, it is conceivable that many things would be out of the control of the US. If anything, the energy crisis is another example demonstrating why Europe needs to have the ability to independently form its own political and economic policies, including energy security. Europe needs to be clear that its interests are not the same as the US's, and it cannot completely follow the US lead on many issues, or it will end up hurting itself. Last week, US President Biden signed the so-called Forced Labor Prevention Act into law. The anti-Chinese legislation will raise new questions for European companies as to their China sourcing, and will also test the political wisdom of the leaders across the European continent. So that's the Chinese view of this. This is all a ploy by the United States. They want to stop Nord Stream 2 being completed. They want to interfere with European gas supplies, Russian gas supplies to Europe, because they want to have the entire European gas market to themselves by providing liquefied natural gas, and that this is bad for Europe and is the cause of the problems this winter. Well, there is a lot of truth to this. I mean, the United States does indeed want to increase supplies of liquefied natural gas to Europe. It does see the present problems in Europe as an opportunity to crank up supplies of liquefied natural gas, now that, as I said, the Asian buyers aren't buying gas at the level that they were. And of course, the United States has had a long-standing hostility to Nord Stream 2, partly undoubtedly because it sees pipeline gas from Russia as a competitor against Russian supplies, against US supplies of liquefied natural gas. Having said this, I do think that this article greatly overstates the realities. I think myself that it's a mistake to think that this is the United States pulling all the strings and acquitting the Europeans for their own follies. I cannot imagine that anybody in Europe seriously believes that liquefied natural gas from the United States could replace Russian pipeline gas or be supplied in anything like the necessary quantities to replace Russian pipeline gas. It is also, of course, structurally more expensive than Russian pipeline gas and would threaten to make European industries even less competitive. It always seems to me that when we talk about these problems of pipeline gas from Russia, we can talk about the US and its concerns to sell liquefied natural gas to Europe, but overall and by and large, it is geopolitics. It is this concern the United States has not to allow European countries to move towards an active trading relationship with Russia, in particular to keep the Germans and the Russians at odds with each other. That is the particular problem, and which explains why there's always been this opposition from the United States to German-Russian pipeline projects. I would add that this was already the case in the 1980s when the Soviets built one of their a major pipeline supplying natural gas from the Soviet Union to Europe. And I can remember that the United States objected to that pipeline vehemently. And of course, there was no question of the US supplying liquefied natural gas at that time. In fact, as I recall, they were offering coal instead. So it's a geopolitical objective as opposed to a economic or commercial objection that, as I said, explains the US hostility to these Russian pipeline projects. I suspect this is going to go on, though, for a while, this US hostility, and of course that doesn't prevent the US cashing in when, as I said, there are problems in the energy situation in Europe. But even allowing for the fact that the Chinese may be, as I said, over-dramatizing the commercial elements to this issue, there's no doubt at all to my mind that the underlying point that the Chinese are making here in their usual tough-minded, pragmatic way is the absolutely correct one, that what the Europeans need to do is to start looking at their energy situation themselves, not deferring all the time to US political sensitivities or US sensitivities, and that for the Europeans, the priority should be looking after their own economic and commercial needs. And if that means telling the Americans that, sorry, we need these pipelines with Russia, they are essential for our own economy and for the well-being of our people, that is the correct policy that the Europeans ought to be following. Instead, there's no doubt at all that part of the reason that the building of Nord Stream 2 has been so politically controversial in Europe itself, and its construction and certification have been so protracted, is because of the intense American opposition to it. If this issue had not been politicized by the United States in the way that it was, then Nord Stream 2 would already be in operation. It would have been in operation probably in 2020. And this problem, this gas crisis that we see in Europe this winter, it would never have arisen. And of course, the Trump administration might still have threatened its sanctions. But of course, if European governments had spoken out and warned the United States that if it did press ahead with those sort of sanctions, Europe would not only disregard them, but would take action, counter-action against American companies operating in Europe, well, that would of course have changed the political picture completely, and we would also have ensured that the pipeline was built, and that these problems of gas supply in Europe would not exist. So, in a sense, the Chinese are right, and they're right to say that the gas shortages in Europe are much more the responsibility of the Americans than they are of the Russians. The Russians want to sell their gas to Europe. They want to supply gas to Europe. They've never shown any interest in using gas supply in order to gain political leverage over the Europeans. It is the United States, it is the government in Washington that has consistently and repeatedly seen this as a political and a geopolitical issue. And if the Europeans can free themselves from this, then they will be doing themselves a huge favor. So in that, of course, the Chinese are completely right. Well, will the Europeans ever learn this tough-minded practical lesson from the Chinese, who, by the way, always approach these sort of matters, these economic matters, in the same tough-minded, realistic way? Well, I think the answer, of course, and straightforwardly, is no, at least not the present generation of European leaders. One gets the sense that with all of them, even those like Emmanuel Macron, who like to give the impression of being more independent of the powers that be in Washington, that all of them, whatever they do, they have their heads screwed backward, looking always at what Washington is going to say. It's an extraordinary, unbalanced relationship in which European leaders consistently show more concern for what people like, say, Ted Cruz say in Congress than what European electorates and European businesses need and are concerned about as winter looms. And it's an extraordinary situation, and one wonders what has to happen before it ends. But anyway, I don't see that it is going to end at any time soon. One thing, however, is definitely happening. Now, I said that the Americans, obviously, their objections to Russian gas pipelines are primarily geopolitical, always move to cash in and take advantage of any gas supply disruptions to Europe, and they're doing so at the moment with their latest supplies of liquefied natural gas to Europe. So, of course, the Americans, as I said, take advantage of these gas supply problems in Europe, which to a great extent they are responsible for creating. But importantly, and perhaps decisively, over the last 10 years, so increasingly have the Chinese. Now, I was reading today a fascinating comment from Gazprom. It's republished by the official Russian news agency TASS, and it says that Gazprom set new records for gas supplies to China on December 23rd. And we read as follows: Gazprom set a historic record for daily deliveries of Russian gas to China via the Power of Siberia pipeline on December 23rd, Gazprom said on Monday. On December 23rd, a historic record was set for daily gas supplies from Russia to China. Gazprom also stressed that gas supplies to consumers in Europe are carried out in full in accordance with current contractual obligations. Gazprom's CEO, Alexei Miller, said that since November, Gazprom's gas supplies to China via the Power of Siberia pipeline have exceeded daily contractual obligations to Chinese partners by more than 1/3. Power of Siberia is the largest gas transportation system in eastern Russia, which supplies gas to Russian consumers in the Far East and China. The export capacity of the gas pipeline is 38 billion cubic meters of gas per year. So China, from having been a country which 10 years ago basically didn't import Russian natural gas, all of it was flowing west to Europe, it's now buying an increasing amount, and it's able to buy an increasing amount because the Russians are prepared to sell them increasing quantities of it. The Russians, in fact, as Gazprom CEO Alexei Miller has said, are exceeding their daily contractual obligations to Chinese partners by more than 1/3. So the Russians are not only selling to the Chinese all the gas that they're contracted to sell under the long-term contracts they have with the Chinese. They're actually doing precisely what they're not doing in Europe. They're selling the Chinese additional gas over and above the gas supplied according to those long-term contracts, and they're doing it in vast quantities, an additional third over and above their long-term contractual obligations. And of course, it doesn't end with Power of Siberia, the Power of Siberia pipeline, because over the last few weeks, the Chinese and the Russians have inked a deal to build a second pipeline, Power of Siberia 2. Except, of course, the Power of Siberia 2 is going to be significantly bigger than Power of Siberia 1. It is going to be able to supply export. Its export capacity will be not 38 billion cubic meters of gas per year, but at least 50 billion cubic meters of gas per year. Now, there was a lot of talk. I was actually present when it was first discussed about Russia building 2 gas pipelines to China. I remember hearing Putin announce that there'd been an agreement in principle to build these 2 giant pipelines. I heard him say this when I was attending the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum in early 2014. The first of these pipelines has been built, but the second, Power of Siberia 2, has been somewhat delayed, and the reason was because there was a disagreement between the Chinese and the Russians over its route. The Russians wanted to build it over the Altai Mountains from a sort of more southerly direction. The Chinese wanted it to pass through Mongolia. Well, no doubt, in part because the Russians are seeing the situation on their European gas market become increasingly complicated, the Russians have conceded, and Power of Siberia 2 will indeed be built, as the Chinese want, via Mongolia. And just a week ago, who was meeting with President Putin of Russia, who held a summit meeting with President Putin of Russia? Well, of course, the president of Mongolia, across whose country this giant pipeline is now going to be built. And this pipeline is going to be sending not Arctic gas to China, but West Siberian gas. In other words, gas from those same gas fields which historically and traditionally have supplied Europe. So the Chinese, looking at all of these problems in Europe, aware of all these complications that the Russians have experienced in Europe, well, just as the Americans are cashing in on this by selling liquefied natural gas to Europe in place of that Russian pipeline gas, well, the Chinese are buying that Russian pipeline gas, which might, in another universe, have been moving westwards towards Europe. And I think it is fair to say that when Power of Siberia 2 is fully up and running, we're going to see that the volumes of natural gas supplied by Gazprom to China will be of the same order of magnitude as the volumes of gas that Gazprom has been supplying to Europe. The Europeans will still be buying more gas, but the Chinese will be rapidly catching up. And of course, if things turn out badly with Nord Stream 2, with further supplies of Russian natural gas to Europe, well, no doubt there will be a Power of Siberia 3, and who knows, perhaps a 4 and 5 and 6. And in the meantime, both China and, by the way, India also are becoming major investors in the Russian energy complex. The Chinese are heavily invested, or at least becoming increasingly invested, in Russian natural gas, liquefied natural gas projects in the Arctic, and recently in that trip to New Delhi by Vladimir Putin, and in Vladimir Putin's discussions with Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, it became clear that the Indians are also seeking to buy from Russia pipeline gas. So we're having a situation where everybody is cashing in on the fact that the Europeans cannot get their energy house in order. The Americans are doing it because they're able to sell more liquefied natural gas to the Europeans, even though I should say that, in my opinion, the lifetime of US ability to export liquefied natural gas is likely to be fairly short, and I suspect that before very long we're going to see those exports from the US of liquefied natural gas decline and perhaps even end. But anyway, for the moment they're able to cash in on it, and in the meantime the big Asian states, China and India, but perhaps especially China, are cashing in. They're making their energy security essentially secure. They're going to be able to ensure that they have the natural gas they need to power their industries, to keep their economies running, to keep their homes warm in the cold winter. Well, I have to say, it does seem to me a very odd state of affairs that we have in Europe, where we mess up our energy policies so comprehensively that all we do is assist our competitors, Chinese, the Americans, perhaps before very long, the Indians also. And of course, we do need to have in Europe that urgent, realistic, tough-minded conversation with ourselves. As I've said, I don't think it's ever going to come. I think European leaders are now so hardwired to look to Washington for a lead that they're going to find it very difficult to break out of that mindset. And of course, so many of them have this visceral antagonism to Russia that blinds them also to the misguided logic that they're following. But there it is. Bad news for European customers, good news for American sellers and producers of liquefied natural gas. Excellent news for the Chinese. What more is there to say? Thank you for joining me for this program today. I look forward to you joining me again soon for more programs, both on this channel and on our main channel, the Duran, where I do programs with my colleague and friend Alex Christoforou. Please also remember to check out Alex's channel. You'll find links under this video, and please remember to join us on our main new platform, Locals, where we have a thriving community, where we're publishing an increasing amount of exclusive content, and where incidentally I'm regularly doing live streams every Wednesday, including this Wednesday which is coming. You can join me for a live stream then. We've also, by the way, recently had an extremely successful live chat which we had over the Christmas period. So you can join us on Locals and you can participate actively in our community that way. And of course, you can also find us on our various other platforms: BitChute, Library, Odyssey, SuperU, the new free speech platform, and Rumble, which is of course now teamed up, combined with Locals. And you can support us also via Patreon and Subscribestar, and by going to our shop, where of course you can now buy, if you wish, a new Good Day mug. Apparently this has been produced following demand, after of course my courtesy to all of you of saying good day at the start of all my videos. Well, I do wish you all a very good day. Now that I'm concluding this program, I would ask you finally to check your subscription and to tick your like button to this video if you've liked this video. And I hope you can join me again soon, and have a very good day until then.